Many of you were with us here this weekend as we were on the air live amid the news, this major U.S. strike on Iran. And tonight here, Iran's retaliation, targeting the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, El Odeid, with a barrage of missiles home to some 10,000 U.S. troops. 13 of 14 missiles intercepted. The other one didn't make it. And just moments ago, the breaking news here, President Trump now saying there could be a ceasefire in the works in the coming hours.
In recent years, there's been a growing interest in how events in Israel may line up with ancient biblical prophecies. Whether you approach this from a faith perspective or as someone curious about world history and current affairs, the connection between what was written thousands of years ago and what's happening today is worth exploring. One of the most widely discussed prophecies involves the city of Jerusalem and the challenges it faces on the global stage. According to a verse in the book of Zechariah, Jerusalem would become a very heavy stone for all peoples, and that all who try to lift it will injure themselves. The prophecy goes on to say that all nations will be gathered against it. Looking at today's headlines, there's clearly a heightened global focus on Jerusalem, not just politically, but in terms of religious and national identity as well. Tensions in and around the city seem to be rising, and international disputes about its status continue. While not everyone will interpret these events the same way, it's difficult to ignore how much attention this one city receives compared to its size and geography. Linked to this is a statement by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, where he warns that in the end times, Jerusalem will be surrounded by armies. That's been a recurring theme throughout the region's modern history, from multiple wars since the mid-20th century, to recent escalations and constant military preparedness. Whether or not one believes this is the specific event referred to in the New Testament, it's not a stretch to see parallels. Another prophecy comes from the book of Ezekiel, written roughly 2,600 years ago. Ezekiel describes a vision in which God declares that the ancient cities of Israel would be rebuilt. The passage specifically mentions that people and animals would multiply, and that the land would be more fruitful than it was in earlier times. Historically, this would have seemed unlikely, especially in the early 1900s, when much of the land was considered barren or underdeveloped. Yet today, cities like Tel Aviv and Beersheba, once modest or even desolate, are bustling hubs of modern life. Skyscrapers have gone up, infrastructure has expanded, and Israel's economy has seen substantial growth, particularly in technology and agriculture. These changes are not just incidental. They reflect intentional national development efforts over many decades. But to those familiar with biblical texts, they can also be seen as the realization of promises made centuries ago. In the same passage, Ezekiel includes a phrase that reinforces this connection. "Then you will know that I am the Lord." It's a statement that implies recognition of divine involvement through observable transformation. Another powerful passage comes from the book of Isaiah, where a highly poetic but meaningful question is posed. Shall a nation be born in one day? This line is often connected to the modern-day establishment of Israel as a nation-state in 1948. On May 14th of that year, David Ben-Gurion, who would become Israel's first prime minister, read the Declaration of Independence in Tel Aviv. This event marked the official founding of the modern state of Israel and came just one day before the British mandate ended. What made this moment especially unique was that it happened so quickly, almost instantly on the world stage. While the geopolitical groundwork was laid over many years and decades, the actual recognition of the state came in a very short time span. Thus, the connection to Isaiah's idea of a nation being born in a single day. Just months earlier, in November 1947, the United Nations had passed Resolution 181, which called for the partition of British-controlled Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. While it sparked immediate conflict and opposition, it also laid the legal and diplomatic framework for Israel's declaration of statehood. This rapid formation wasn't just a political milestone. For many, it was the fulfillment of prophetic language that had, until then, remained in the realm of distant hope. For centuries, the Jewish people had been without a homeland. The diaspora following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD scattered them across the world. Various attempts to return to the land of their ancestors were made over the centuries, but none were sustained or formally recognized until 1948. There's also a passage in the book of Ezekiel where God says, "I will take the people of Israel from the nations among which they have gone, and will gather them from all around, and bring them to their land." This has been interpreted by many as a promise of regathering, a return from exile. What makes this especially significant is that the Jewish diaspora wasn't limited to one region or a short period of time. It spanned continents and centuries, with communities forming in Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and later in the Americas and beyond. That this regathering began to happen in the 20th century is seen by some as more than just the result of historical circumstances. Following the horrors of the Holocaust, global sympathy played a role in supporting the idea of a Jewish homeland. Immigration waves, known in Hebrew as Aliyah, increased before and after Israel's founding, with people coming from places as varied as Yemen, Russia, Ethiopia, and the United States. Today, Israel is home to Jews from nearly every part of the world, reflecting that sense of being gathered from all around. In some discussions, there's a tendency to simplify these developments as either purely political or strictly spiritual. But in truth, they're likely a combination of both. The land's transformation, its rebirth as a modern state, the revival of the Hebrew language, the rebuilding of ancient cities, has layers of meaning. Whether someone reads the Bible as sacred text, ancient literature, or historical reference, the consistency between these passages and present-day events is striking. To be clear, not everyone accepts these events as fulfilled prophecy. There are debates within religious communities, academic circles, and political forums about how to interpret both the texts and the events. Some argue that the return to the land is incomplete, or that certain conditions in the prophecies haven't yet been met. Others see these milestones as part of a larger unfolding plan, with more to come in the years ahead. But one thing is certain: Israel's reestablishment and development in the modern age has been remarkable. The country has gone from a mostly barren stretch of land with scattered populations to a nation with advanced infrastructure, growing cities, and global influence. And whether one believes in prophecy or not, the story is undeniably powerful. It invites reflection. It raises questions. And for many, it strengthens faith. For others, it offers a lens through which to view the complexities of history and current events. Either way, looking at these ancient texts in light of what's happening today offers a compelling and thought-provoking perspective, one that continues to shape discussions around identity, purpose, and destiny. One of the core themes in these prophecies is the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. This return, often referred to by the Hebrew word Aliyah, is seen as a fulfillment of promises that God made to the people of Israel thousands of years ago. In the book of Amos, for instance, there's a verse that says, "I will plant them in their land, and they will never again be uprooted from the land I have given them." That statement carries a strong message of permanence and restoration. Similarly, in the book of Zechariah, another prophecy says, "I will save my people from the east and from the west. I will bring them back, and they will live in Jerusalem. They will be my people, and I will be their God, in truth and righteousness." This image of people returning from all directions of the earth has been interpreted by many as referring to the Jewish diaspora, those who have lived outside of Israel for generations, and their eventual return to the land. For many centuries, Jews lived in scattered communities across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. Following the Roman Empire's destruction of Jerusalem in the 1st century, large-scale dispersion began, and it continued throughout history due to persecution, war, and changing political boundaries. For many Jewish families, the idea of returning to the land of their ancestors remained a distant hope passed down from generation to generation. In the last 100 years, that hope started to become reality. The 20th and 21st centuries have seen significant waves of Jewish immigration back to Israel. After World War II, and particularly following the Holocaust, there was a strong push for a Jewish homeland. The establishment of the modern state of Israel in 1948 created a destination for Jewish people who had been displaced, persecuted, or simply seeking to return to their historic homeland. The numbers speak for themselves. Jewish people began arriving from countries like Poland, Russia, Yemen, Ethiopia, Iran, the United States, and more. Each wave of immigration reflected not only a response to global events, such as war or political instability, but also a deeply rooted desire to reconnect with a land tied to their history, culture, and religious identity. One modern example of this return is the organized efforts by groups and agencies that help Jewish people make Aliyah. One of the more well-known organizations involved in this is Nefesh B'Nefesh, which has coordinated thousands of flights bringing new immigrants to Israel. In a recent event, they celebrated their 60th chartered flight, each one full of people who had planned and waited, sometimes for years, to take this life-changing step. For many of these immigrants, touching down in Israel is the fulfillment of a long-held dream, deeply emotional and personal. While the return of people is a major part of the story, the transformation of the land itself is another powerful element that ties into biblical prophecy. In Isaiah 35, for example, it says, "The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the rose." This kind of imagery is repeated in several prophetic books, suggesting that the once barren or dry regions of the land would become fertile, blooming, and productive. At the beginning of the 20th century, large parts of the region now known as Israel were dry, underpopulated, and lacking in infrastructure. Swamps, deserts, and rocky landscapes made farming and development difficult. But through decades of work, new agricultural methods, water management, and determination, the landscape has been dramatically changed. Today, Israel is a leader in desert agriculture and water conservation. The Negev Desert, which covers more than half of Israel's land area, now hosts a surprising number of farms, greenhouses, and even wineries. Advanced drip irrigation techniques, many of which were developed in Israel, have allowed farmers to grow crops in areas that would have been considered uninhabitable not long ago. Israel's produce doesn't just feed its own population. A significant portion is exported around the world. From citrus fruits to avocados, and from herbs to wine, Israeli agricultural exports reach Europe, North America, and beyond. The idea that Israel would fill the face of the world with fruit, as one prophecy in Isaiah 27 suggests, seems less abstract when you see the volume and reach of the country's agricultural exports today. This agricultural success isn't just a technological achievement, it's often viewed as a modern sign of prophetic fulfillment. In practical terms, it has helped make Israel more self-sufficient and resilient. In symbolic terms, it reflects a dramatic change from desolation to abundance, echoing the ancient promises that the land would once again thrive when the people returned. It's important to recognize that these developments didn't happen in isolation. They've been the result of hard work, planning, and sometimes difficult circumstances. Immigrants who arrived in Israel during the early years of statehood often lived in temporary housing, worked in tough conditions, and had to build from very little. But over time, these efforts contributed to a broader national story, one that connects modern progress to historical and spiritual roots. Many people who visit Israel today are surprised by how modern and developed it is. Cities like Tel Aviv are known for their high-tech industries and cosmopolitan culture. At the same time, ancient cities like Jerusalem maintain their historic and religious significance, while also functioning as part of a modern, diverse society. This blend of old and new is a defining feature of the country, and for those looking through the lens of biblical prophecy, it adds another layer of meaning. It's also worth noting that not everyone agrees on what these events mean or how they should be interpreted. Some see them purely as political developments. Others view them as part of a divine plan unfolding. There are also those who believe that while some prophecies have been fulfilled, others are still to come. What's clear, however, is that the changes taking place in Israel, both in terms of people returning and the land itself thriving, are significant. The question of how far these events align with prophecy is a deeply personal one. People bring their own beliefs, backgrounds, and interpretations to the discussion. But regardless of where you stand, the facts on the ground speak to a remarkable transformation, one that many believe was not only predicted, but promised. For those who approach this from a faith perspective, the return of the Jewish people to Israel and the blooming of its land are signs of hope and restoration. For others, they are examples of what can happen when determination, innovation, and history come together. And for some, it's a bit of both. In today's world, the headlines coming out of the Middle East, especially concerning Israel, often center on conflict. One of the most discussed and closely watched rivalries is between Israel and Iran. This long-standing tension has gone beyond diplomatic disagreements and political rhetoric. It has become increasingly military in nature. In recent years, and particularly in recent months, things have escalated further. There have been direct missile strikes, cyber attacks, and retaliatory operations on both sides. The intensity of this conflict leads many people to wonder whether what we're witnessing ties into any biblical prophecy about the end times. According to the New Testament, Jesus warned his followers that there would be wars and rumors of wars in the days leading up to significant future events. He said these things must happen, but also pointed out that the end would not come immediately. Instead, he described them as the beginning of sorrows. This phrase, beginning of sorrows, has been widely discussed in Christian teachings. It refers to a period of rising unrest and global instability before the events commonly referred to as the tribulation or the final stages of world history as described in biblical texts. Jesus made clear that conflict would be one of the markers of this period, but he also stressed that believers should not be alarmed as these were expected developments in a broader plan. The Israel-Iran conflict has certainly captured global attention. Iran has consistently voiced strong opposition to Israel's right to exist, while Israel has accused Iran of funding and supporting groups that directly threaten Israeli security, such as Hezbollah and Hamas. Over the years, both countries have taken covert and overt action against one another. In a recent escalation, Iran launched a series of missile strikes on Tel Aviv, leading to casualties and damage. Israel responded forcefully, targeting Iranian infrastructure and reportedly killing several individuals linked to Iran's nuclear and military programs. Though some may wonder if this is the Battle of Armageddon or the War of Gog and Magog, as described in biblical texts like Revelation and Ezekiel, many scholars and theologians suggest that we are not there yet. Those prophesied battles are expected to take place during or near the end of the tribulation period, and they involve specific alliances and outcomes that have not yet formed. Still, this current conflict could be viewed as a stepping stone, a sign that the world is moving closer to that future scenario described in Scripture. What this ongoing tension does highlight, however, is the fragile state of global peace and how rapidly situations can escalate. Wars and unrest have been a constant throughout history, but the stakes today are higher with modern weapons and interconnected politics. These developments have caused some to pay closer attention to what biblical prophecy may or may not say about our current world events. Shifting from the physical conflict to a more theological discussion, another topic that often comes up is the phrase synagogue of Satan. This phrase appears in the book of Revelation, specifically in chapters 2 and 3. In these passages, Jesus is addressing the churches in Smyrna and Philadelphia. He warns them about those who claim to be Jews but are not, and instead belong to what he calls the synagogue of Satan. This statement has been interpreted in many different ways, and unfortunately, has sometimes been used to promote harmful or misleading ideas. It's important to understand the original context to get a clearer picture of what's being said. In these letters to the early Christian churches, Jesus is addressing a specific group of people who were opposing and persecuting early Christians. These were likely individuals from the local Jewish communities who had rejected the message of Jesus as the Messiah and were actively speaking against the believers. So, rather than being a sweeping statement about all Jewish people, it was more likely directed at a particular group at that time in history. Interpreting it as a blanket accusation against all Jews would not align with the broader teachings of the Bible, especially when taking other passages into account. In fact, if we look at the book of Romans, particularly chapter 11, the picture becomes more nuanced. Paul, who was himself Jewish, explains that while many Jewish people rejected Jesus during his time, this was part of a larger plan. He writes that through their rejection, salvation came to the Gentiles. This opened the door for people from all nations to come into a relationship with God. But it didn't mean that God had rejected the Jewish people entirely. Paul uses the image of an olive tree to explain this. The natural branches represent the Jewish people, and the wild branches represent Gentiles, non-Jewish believers. Because of unbelief, some of the natural branches were broken off, and wild branches were grafted in. But Paul also makes it clear that the natural branches can be grafted back in. He even says that they will be, once the full number of Gentiles has come in. This shows a long-term plan that includes both Jews and Gentiles being part of God's family. He goes on to say that the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. In other words, God's promises to the Jewish people haven't been canceled or taken back. They are still part of His plan. Paul emphasizes that even though they may currently be in a state of spiritual disobedience, they are still beloved because of the promises made to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is where interpretation really matters. Instead of viewing Jewish people as permanently cast out or labeled negatively, Scripture seems to point to a temporary situation, one that will eventually be resolved through reconciliation. The same passage says that just as Gentiles received mercy through the disobedience of the Jews, so too will the Jewish people receive mercy through the faith of the Gentiles. It's a mutual story of restoration. The book of Revelation later refers to a group of 144,000 people from the 12 tribes of Israel who are sealed by God and stand with Jesus on Mount Zion. This is another indication that Jewish people will play a key role in the final events of history, according to Scripture. These individuals are described as God's servants, suggesting that their calling is not lost, but rather reserved for a specific time and purpose. For people who are frustrated by the current beliefs or actions of some within the Jewish community, particularly in relation to Jesus, this can be a difficult idea. But the message of the Bible is one of hope and patience. The goal isn't to condemn, but to pray for understanding and unity. In Luke 6:37, Jesus said, "Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven." These words offer guidance for how to approach disagreements, even significant ones. It's also worth remembering that many biblical texts speak positively about those who bless Israel or pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Whether one interprets these texts literally or symbolically, they reflect an attitude of goodwill rather than hostility. In the end, the Bible presents a layered and unfolding story. It speaks of conflict, yes, but also of peace, redemption, and reconciliation. The idea is not that one group replaces another, but that ultimately, people from every nation, tribe, and background are called to be part of a unified spiritual family. As we reflect on everything from geopolitical tensions to theological debates, it helps to keep the big picture in mind. History is complex. Faith is often personal. And prophecy, if one believes in it, can be both challenging and encouraging. What matters most, perhaps, is approaching these topics with humility, a willingness to learn, and a heart open to peace and truth. Whether or not we agree on every interpretation, we can agree on the importance of dialogue, understanding, and compassion. And with that in mind, the conversation continues.